Hey, everybody. This is Mary Robinette Kowal, and we are going to be talking about honing your sentences, finding problems, and leveling up. I don't do my language pass until the end. A lot of this comes from having been an art major, in which, to me, polishing all of my prose is like sanding a sculpture before I finish sculpting it. I wait until the end. I usually do a read aloud. And when I'm doing that read aloud, I am looking for a number of problems. They tend to be in these categories: ambiguity, mental repetition, rhythm, confusing structure, distant. I feel distant from the character, and just drab. Just like, bleh. Let's dive into each of those. And I have a very exciting thing for you. I have prose from me when I was in high school. I have to tell you, actually, this is slightly better because I did do an edit pass early in my career to see if I could salvage this, like before I had sold anything. Because when I originally wrote this, it was all first person present tense stream of consciousness. So we've made at least one improvement there. But it is serviceable, but it's pretty lackluster. So let me show you what happens when I do this read aloud. He was down there. Kowal could tell from the faint scent of musk that overlay the smells of the city. He moved fairly silently for a human. He was almost under the balcony Care crouched on. She had to time it right, or she was dead. Now. She flipped down to hang from the waist. I need to. His weight shifted as he threw something at her. His crook stick. Care dropped and twisted out of the way, but it was farther than she thought, and without the buoyancy of water, her weight fell heavily to the ground. Above her, she heard the faint whistle in the air as the crook stick spun back along its path. Care rolled out of the way and reached up to block the crook stick, bracing for the pain. As the crook stick spun overhead, she wrenched it out of the air. Agony seared her hands as the crook stick slammed into her palm. So this is serviceable, but it's not good. It is filled with things. So let's talk about them. Ambiguity. He was down there. So this is, I'm going to just flip back so you can look at this again. This is the opening. I'm like, hello, everybody. He was down there. Who? Who is he? Where is there? Why does it matter? There are so many things that are ambiguous about there. Was is even ambiguous. It's like, is he dead down there? Is he walking down there? What was he doing? So you want to be specific. You want to think about your areas of intention. So who is he? So specifically, the assassin she needed to hire. And where was he? He was not just down there, he was below her hiding spot on the balcony. So I've made this a little more specific, and I've done that by thinking about my areas of intention. Like I could have said Harlan Jamos was down there. Harlan Jamos was below her hiding spot on the balcony, but Harlan Jamos is his name, but it's not the piece of information I need to convey to the reader. The reader doesn't care what this guy's name was. The area of intention is that what I want to do at this point is to introduce you to the fact that she's looking to hire an assassin. And my other area of intention, I believe, was to build tension, have this foreboding weight. He was down there. Like you can't, that's not an opening line that's useful. That could be literally anything. That could have been, her grandfather was downstairs in the kitchen. The veterinarian was down at the lower pasture. Like he was down there could mean anything. So be specific, think about your area of intention. Mental repetition. So you can use repetition to good effect. So you don't need to get rid of all repetition. You just want to get rid of the stuff you didn't do on purpose. So what do we have here? Above her, she heard the faint whistle in the air as the crook stick spun back along its path. Care rolled out of the way and reached up to block the crook stick, bracing for the pain. As the crook stick spun overhead, she wrenched it out of the air. Agony seared her hands as the crook stick slammed into her palm. I wonder what was going on there? What was that? So there are times when you will find a sentence that you say, like a word that you just keep repeating. Sometimes it's a phrase. This is not a problem that goes away as you age. I just had to fix something in the Martian contingency, which I'm working on now, in which I managed to say the night sky like every other sentence for 2 paragraphs. It was impressive. The reason that the accidental repetition is a problem is that people are hardwired to pay attention to the sounds in their environment. Repetition, like a water drip, that's not a natural thing. That's not a thing that happens usually in nature unless it is connected to something. So footfalls, there's a repetition there, the plink of water. Once you hear it, your attention is drawn to it. And so if you're not intending to draw people's attention to it, then it becomes a problem because they're now paying attention to the wrong thing. So it's a pretty easy fix. You just look for synonyms, you use your pronouns, you break up your sentence structure a little. So in this case, I just swapped out crookstick. I kept the first one to identify it. Above her, she heard the faint whistle in the air as the crookstick spun back along its path. And in answer to your question, no, I don't remember what that was. Crookstick spun back along its path. Care rolled out of the way and reached up to block it. Hey, yay, pronoun. Bracing for the pain. As it spun overhead, she wrenched the weapon, synonym, out of the way, out of the air. Agony seared her hands as the heavy wood slammed into her palm, descriptive text. Those are just a couple of things that you can do to address the accidental repetition rhythm. So one of the places can become really jarring is when you begin the same sentence every single time that way. And it's usually when it's like subject verb object or subject verb clause. In this case, I'm doing subject verb clause, subject verb clause. He moved fairly silently for a human. He was almost under the balcony Kara crouched on. She had to time it right or she was dead. It's the same sentence construction over and over again. So I swap it around quite a bit. He moved fairly silently for a human. In a moment, his path would carry him under the balcony Kara crouched on. But if she didn't time her jump right, she was dead. Confusing structure. I'm going to be a little bit fair to my teenage self. This was not a single giant sentence. I did go ahead and remove a period and a comma, but I also have seen things that are written this way. Kel dropped and twisted out of the way, but it was farther than she thought, and without the buoyancy of the water, her weight fell heavily on the ground. Okay, so there's more than one problem in this, but we're going to talk about the first one, which is that it's just too long. It's hard to tell what to focus on. So Care twisted out of the way. Great. Without the buoyancy of the water, her own body weight betrayed her. She fell, slamming into the paving stones. So that's thing one. Thing two in this one is order. So she dropped and twisted out of the way, and then she fell, but she's already fallen because she's dropped. My sequencing is bad here, among other things. We want to be thinking about cause and effect. So agony seared her hands as the crookstick slammed into her palm. So what's happening here is that the agony, she's feeling pain before the crookstick has touched her. So as the crookstick slammed into her palm, agony seared her hands. Is a better structure. It's still not a good sentence. Agony seared her hands is actually still pretty terrible. Like, what does that actually mean? It's so not specific. Sometimes these are things that you can't flag on your own. Like this one, it's easy to spot on the page because it's like, where's my punctuation in this sentence? What is it doing? The next one is easy to spot because there's a cause effect issue here. But sometimes confusing structures are things that you have to have someone else flag for you, where they're like, what does this mean? Distant. So this is one of the really big things that I see happen when I've been reading Slush. And it's really actually one of the biggest problems with this passage. It's distant. You don't feel connected to the narrator. I've got one thing in there where I've got a sensory detail going on. Carol only could tell from the faint scent of musk that overlay the smells of the city. It's not even a complete sentence. He moved fairly silently for a human. In a moment, his path would carry him under the balcony, carried on. But if she didn't time her jump right, she was dead. And this is filled with problems. It's got reporting words in it. And a reporting word is where you tell me the thing, you tell me that the character is having an experience rather than actually kind of diving in and letting them have it. Carol and Lee could tell. So I have reported that she is smelling things, as opposed to this version of it. A faint scent of musk rose above the garbage funk of the city to warm her nostrils. Garbage funk, I got more specific about what the smells of the city were, going back to my specificity thing. But I got rid of Carol Lee could tell. Almost any time that you're doing something like, my character heard, my character saw, unless you are needing to emphasize this thing, that the action of seeing it, unless you need to emphasize it, you can assume that they are experiencing the thing that you've talked about. The other problem that I've got in this is that there's a lack of sensory details. Like faint scent of musk, that's it. There are no other sensory details in this at all. So I went in and I added some. Garbage funk closed her eyes, using that fragrant trail to orient until she caught a single soft scuff of his soul. And then down here, flexing her fingers on the rough stone balustrade, sweat stuck grit to her palms. That's a sensory detail. And those can help you feel more connected to the character, because we do this thing called mirroring. It doesn't happen. There are people for whom it doesn't happen, but many, like a significant portion of your reading population will do this. That when you put something down, sweat stuck grit to her palms, that you're tapping into a sense memory that they've got, that they have, and that ties them closer to the character. So that's one of the ways that you can make the character be less distant. Interaction with the environment. My original iteration, she's completely inactive. He's moving, but we don't even see his movement. We hear a description that it's pretty quiet, but she's not interacting with this environment at all. So here I'm having her interact with the environment, because interactions with the environment are action, and it gives you a more active protagonist. So closing her eyes, using that fragrant scent to orient, flexing her fingers on the rough stone balustrade. So instead of just saying she's, this is a balcony and it's got a balustrade, I can have her interact with the environment. And then an interior life. I do have some interior life. I'm using a little bit of free indirect speech. In the original, she had to time it right or she was dead. That's free indirect speech. That's actually not terrible. It's not specific. Like she had to time it. What is it? She had to time an arrow. She had to time a whispered conversation. She had to time her jump right. In all of these, it's a question of being accidental, because you can do something from a character and use like absolutely no adjectives or adverbs, have very sparse prose, and to good effect. It's when you're doing it without intention that it becomes a problem. Okay, then drab. Sometimes the prose is just boring. The way you fix that is through active verbs and then emphasis through unpacking. So let's talk about active verbs first. The assassin she needed to hire was below her hiding spot on the balcony. But the assassin she needed to hire sauntered below her hiding spot on the balcony immediately paints a more vivid picture. This is why people will tell you to avoid passive voice, to be. There's absolutely no problem with it. It's just that often you are not being as descriptive as you can be. So looking for the places where, oh, you know what, I can dial this up by giving it a more active verb, more descriptive. I say active, but a more descriptive verb. And then emphasis through unpacking. So in this second thing, I've actually gotten much longer. The assassin sauntered below the balcony where Carol Lee had spent the past hour crouched in hiding. Every part of her plan hinged on hiring this unassuming silent man. So what I'm doing here is I am looking at what I want to emphasize. And I could have rewritten this a number of different ways. I could have decided that I really wanted to emphasize the balcony and given you a lot more information about the balcony, but I don't. Like, so I'm not going to give you any more information about the balcony than it's a balcony. I could have spent a lot more time talking about exactly where she was hiding on the balcony, but that's not the important part. The important part of the sentence is the assassin, because you remember that this began as he was down there. And my high school self wanted you to be interested in who this was. He was down there. So I'm doing two things. One is that I've unpacked it, but I've also been very specific about where I'm putting my emphasis. The assassin sauntered. I'm painting a picture of him initially. And then I do a technique that I call circling, which is that I come back to him. So this is where we get to what I call the recency primacy effect. People tend to notice the first thing and the last thing in a list. And a sentence or a paragraph is in some ways a list. So here, the assassin and unassuming silent man become both my first thing and my last thing. So everything in the middle is still there and important, but it does not carry the same emphasis as the thing that I hit twice. The other piece that I wanted you to know is a little bit about the hiding spot. The important thing about the hiding spot is that it is the amount of time that she spent there. So that gives me the assassin sauntered below the balcony where Kara only had spent the past hour crouched and hiding. Every part of her plan hinged on hiring this unassuming silent man. I'm also giving you new information in this version. I've got she needed to hire. What I've done is I've broken it out and I've moved it. But every part of her plan hinged on hiring this unassuming silent man. So reporting words like she saw or they noticed look like they should be character action, but they are not. One of the things that I want to kind of emphasize is that being specific does not mean describing all things. It means making more deliberate choices. So in those sentences that I was showing you, I'm not describing all the things. Like that's where you get into purple prose. Like the broad-shouldered assassin sauntered below the gritty balcony where Karolny had spent the past mind-numbing hour crouched in painful hiding. It's like you have emphasized everything. So pick your battles. Being specific. All right, now we get to look at these side by side. Since I was doing the editing in isolation for my examples, a lot of it didn't work when I plugged it into the whole thing. So I broke it up. So here's my original. High school Mary Robinette. He was down there. Karolny could tell from the faint scent of musk that overlay the smells of the city. Yeah. The assassin sauntered below the balcony where Karolny had spent the past hour crouched in hiding. Every part of her plan hinged on hiring this unassuming silent man. A faint scent of his musk rose above the garbage funk of the city to warm her nostrils. Karolny closed her eyes, using the aroma to track him. For a human, he moved fairly silently. So part of what I just did there is that I broke that out into its own paragraph to trigger the recency primacy effect, so that it is basically in a list by itself. For a human, he moved fairly silently, because I really want you to see that. I really want you to catch that. In the original, I had he moved fairly silently for a human, which is also an appropriate choice. And by moving for a human to the end of the sentence, what I'm doing is I'm drawing attention to it. So I could have made that choice here as well. Karolny closed her eyes, using the aroma to track him. He moved fairly silently for a human. Either of those would be correct for varying forms of correct.